I've seen the best minds of my generation destroyed by indifference, crawling through automaton streets, following crippling contingencies orchestrated in the Nuremberg night. Our forefathers twisted and fixed upon paper printed with invisible ink, forever sinking in the mire of our discontent. Who among you have sent your sons and daughters to the slaughter of obedient decay? Who among you have traded your pound of flesh for a crisp folded flag waving in the grave? Dear mother, was it worth the pangs of childbirth? Dear father, was it worth your steady hand? Your children fight for lines drawn in the sand, washed away by sentient storms, streaming rivers of blood debased in the face of dissension. Where were you when the sides were chosen? Where were you when the flags were burned to the ground? Churning in the melting pot, we stare into the abyss, eyes closed and dilated, sealing ourselves off from our vacant identity, from roots diseased beneath the soil. Dig deeper, O image of God. Dig deeper, O fat of the land. Our children have been branded with our discrimination, impregnated with our numb inconsideration for those that can make us whole once again. Every man can be the overman, if we only lay our arms to waste. If only we take a stand against the machine. Speaking simply, in this hour of confusion, we can cut through the interference born of infomercial matrices, dancing bright before our atrophied eyes, dazzling our perception away from the blood in the streets, blood upon our hands, blood upon our breath. Harbingers of death are we, black angels with broken wings, singing cheap plastic anthems to hide our shame. Who is to blame if not we? Who is to blame if not our hollow pledge of allegiance? How convenient are the atrocities of our everyday lives? How convenient are the meticulous remunerations tallied against ourselves? Complacent assumptions drawn from crimson tides, prideful consequences burning our broken youths upon their bones filled with the marrow of our indiscretions. When will we end this hallowed tyranny? When will we look under the dress of our fair sister liberty, naked and unashamed? When will we face the horror cast by the shadows of our tongues? Big Brother binds our hearts from healing, dealing out its drugs of stupor and sedation, counting on the fact of our ineptitude and suicidal ambition, banking on the shattered dreams of our conformity. We must rage against the darkness of our oppressors, rage against the prosecution of our deliberate resistance, until at last the levee breaks and the silent majority is drowned by the terror of our freedom. We must bring the rain down from above the clouds. We must sing out the song of our weary warriors dying in the dust. We must unleash the lust of our fortitude, watering the thorny roses of the unknown soldier, begging for its bread on street corners, desolate and cold with contempt. No one is exempt from the attrition of our unity. No one is exempt from the impunity of our dishonest disclosure. The truth will out. The truth will undermine the fallacy of the privileged. We have embarked upon a descent into the real politic. We have embarked upon a journey to salvation, regardless of recrimination. We have been waiting to return home from the hunt, crippled from an indecency become all too commonplace, sponsored by sigils burned beneath our skin. Riddled with doubt in the hour of our insurgence, we ignore the demolition of our kinship. We ignore the transmission of the womb. Lost in the blissful bloodlust of demolition, we ignore the beating of our kindred hearts, shooting arrows of poisonous deceit blindly over rivers and highways, seeking to subjugate the undeniable truth of our hideous display. Ours is a shallow history of ambient annihilation, war engines of patriotic propaganda barbarously roaming within unrelenting hands of ostentatious aristocracy, fabricating imminent threats for indigenous tribes, bribing our belief systems toward the illusion of success. It is only when we assume a position of non-aggressive non-compliance that the overman will rise against the vacuous tide decreed by the gilded investments of sepulchral kings. We are a nation of cancerous scorpions, stinging ourselves in the back with our own human condition, constricting the awareness of our earthly exhibition. Blood is the life, and in the murderous possession, we take ourselves in vain, stealing our pain away behind an iron curtain of programmed ignorance and obedient disconnection. Where were you when we assassinated your mother with your finger on the trigger? Where were you when we assassinated your father with your finger on the trigger? Where were you when we assassinated your siblings with your finger on the trigger? Where were you when we assassinated your children with your finger on the trigger? Where were you when we assassinated your lover, your neighbor, your awareness, your compassion, your kindness, your sympathy, your understanding, your life, your light, your liberty, your love? Where were you when we assassinated yourself with your finger on the trigger? Is it worth the price we pay for our Sunday sermon? Is it worth segregating our cherished sentiments into sound bites of catatonic coercion? We say the colors of our flag don't run. But how can that be when we constantly hemorrhage the life force of our liberation into luxury cars driven by detached hands manicured and soft? Who among us is not a slave? Who among us is not expendable? It is not our duty to take a stand against this bondage. We must walk hand in hand in conscientious objection to all that threatens the way of life, the singular principle central to the cultivation of the spirit of every man, the nexus to the expression of the soul, and the necessity of true evolution. There is no other solution but a loving remonstration to the glib enchantments cast by the cathode ray yantra of our television sets. Day after day we are drawn hopelessly into its deleterious web, submersed in an internet of disinformation, drawing our attention away into its septic cocoon of tranquil apathy. Where were you when we assassinated your soul with your finger on the trigger? It is the illusory, unlimited freedom of our Constitution that belies the unrest of the people. It is the steeples of the wealthy that contrast the impoverished majority, proving the falsehood of our equality and the amorphous status of our rights. We recognize the blight of our high-rolling rulers bleeding us dry, spending at the expense of our hard-earned and blood-stained bread, filling our heads with the fantasy of democratic equilibrium. We must take responsibility for the disintegration of the middle class by the insouciant attitudes with which we have euthanized our vigil. It is the misdirection of our media that has brought our advertence to a standstill. Inane cycles of technicolor trance and euphoric self-immolation, taking the breath from our natural wonder and holistic inquiry. We have made the world into the image of our disillusion. We have paid for our freedom with the fear of our fellow man. We have turned ourselves into servants of an insecure God of wrath, entering upon a path of predominant belligerence. We live a lie of provincial prejudice, misguided and diseased. We stare at our cell phones secretly ashamed of our glaring disgrace. Displaced, we send text messages to soothe our psychic ills. Filled with fear and loathing, we share meaningless memes instead of our souls face to face. We have become a race of infidels hiding behind enemy lines, prisoners in a penitentiary guarded by garrulous leaders who dance upon the dead body of our contrition, volitionally committing a ritual genocide of our spiritual self. Carry on, O wayward son, O wayward daughter. We must strike hard with our love, cauterizing our wounds of devious intent with sweet kisses, unrelenting in our march against this global massacre, this holocaust of humanity looming behind our suburban serenity. We must rebel against our descent into indifference, not just on campuses and colleges, but in our hearts and in our homes. We must start a revolution of mutual restitution, rebuilding the fractured institutions of our emotional content. We need not repent the great lives lost before us, but we must honor their demise with dedicated reproach, invoking a constructive admonition of a civilization lost. Let it not be redundant to say, the time for change is now. Our love is the greatest weapon we have against the ego, the underman pinning us down upon the matrix of our selfish design. Let us resign ourselves to the overman clamoring to get out. Let us take up a stance of rigid disaffection towards those who would suppress our solidarity. Our confirmation to uphold the unity of our acceptance. We are all but a singular organism fighting within itself to survive the suffocation of our prejudicial associations. To survive the limitations of our inherited beliefs, we must take a stand against our fearful resignation. In this hour of conflict, there is nothing left to lose but our choice to decide the fate of our outcome preconceived. We have been deceived into a state of complacent imagination, our destination unknown except to lovers, mystics, and madmen. What sadness have we but the eventuality of our emancipation? The proclamation of our intolerance is imminent and yet forbidden. But it is that forbidding factor which drives us on into fruition, making us the dreamer of dreams and the seeds of tomorrow. We must bear the harrowing decisions forced upon us as a blessing, caressing the curses cast upon us as angels in disguise, rising above the harvest moon and seeing it as a summer solstice. We must see ourselves as the world and nothing besides. Wake up and breathe the fresh air of our freedom unfettered. Wake up and live the dream of love unconditional. The moment is only the beginning. Wake up. The only time is now.